The following presentation is brought to you through the power of science.
Ooh, shiny.
Welcome to Generations Geek, a more or less family-friendly celebration of all that is geeky. I'm science fiction writer Scott Pearson, and along with my daughter Ella, we are two generations of geek. This is episode 52, Into the Trek Zone, featuring the return of science fiction writer William Leisner. Following our review of First Man in episode 50, we dived into a discussion of Bill's geeky roots and his books, including his Star Trek stories and novels, and other writing projects he's working on. Ella is, of course, still busy at uni in London, but will Skype in for a geeky update following my chat with Bill. Remember, you can find us online at generationsgeek.com, including blog posts from me and handy links to all our episodes. Plus, check out the Generations Geek Instagram, featuring Ella's geeky adventures. Now, on with the show. Okay, we're back, and we can kind of springboard off that discussion of space movies by getting into fictional space. You are a science fiction writer, but I'm going to go back to the beginning, all the way to the beginning.
Back to the beginning.
Yes.
Okay.
So, I'm always interested in hearing, when would you say, in retrospect, with what you know now, looking back on your whole life, when would you say that you really, that's when I was a geek? How young would you really push back that definition?
Around 6, 7 years old with the with Star Trek the animated series.
All right.
When it was airing on NBC, and I remember being out with my parents and my brothers at some kind of, I think we were at a flea market of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
or a large garage sale, and I was concerned because we weren't going to get home in time to see Star Trek. And when we got home, I rushed down to the basement TV room to turn on Star Trek.
That, and that handles my next question, because then I always segue from when did it really start to asking what was your gateway? And for you, it was in fact Star Trek.
It was Star Trek. I don't remember if I had seen the live action series before the cartoon series. But I remember that flea market, and I remember that panic of not getting home in time to see it. But I have been watching the Star Trek series, from a very young age.
Do you remember if you were digging into other sci-fi stuff at the time? Sci-fi shows or sci-fi books or sci-fi comic books?
At that early of an age, I don't think so. I mean, I was reading Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary. It was probably not until, closer to 8, 9, 10 that I started going to the library. I was lucky enough that I walked to school for most of my grade school years, and my walking route was right by the library. So I was, usually dropping into the library 3 times a week, going in, and I was looking for, Isaac Asimov and anything, going through the science fiction section and seeing what caught my eyes.
So let's step outside of Star Trek for a moment, as difficult as that may be to do. What are some of the books and authors that you would call out from? You mentioned Asimov.
Yeah, Asimov, the robot stories were what really caught my interest at that point in time. And then there was also Star Wars at the same point in time, and I really did gravitate more towards the media sci-fi, the Star Wars, the Star Trek. I remember reading 2001 around the same time that I had seen the movie, and for an idea of saying what was actually going on the screen, and oh, okay, this makes sense now that Arthur Clarke has spelled it out for me.
When then did you start noodling around with writing your own stories? If you tended more toward watching sci-fi than reading sci-fi.
Well, my earliest writings were comic strips.
Really?
Yes, me and my brother, who's 1 year younger, we would draw comic strips for each other, which would, feature our stuffed animals and
Nice.
anthropomorphized
Yeah.
and having little adventures and interacting with us and other things.
Mhm.
And so that was like when I was very young and into drawing, and I was trying to do Man Magazine type of did parent try to
Classic.
do. I remember I did a Man Magazine style of the '60s Batman, which was just so open to the kind of ridicule and of the Man Magazine style. And then I didn't really get serious about writing until I went to college, Ithaca College, and they had their own campus television station. And freshman year, they were just starting up a dramatic anthology series, or an anthology series, not necessarily dramatic, but they were asking for short scripts of the Twilight Zone variety. I should have brought up Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone was another huge influence in my youth.
So when you started writing, you still were more focused on the visual medium. You started with comic strips, then you started writing scripts.
Yes.
Interesting.
And so the first real serious attempt at writing for somebody other than myself or my immediate family or teachers was the script that I wrote freshman year. The title of it was God's Game, and it was the Faust story, except that it was a young man who sold his soul to the devil, who later became a Catholic priest. And then when the devil comes back to collect his soul, he proposes a contest, which turns out to be the church bingo game.
And then did this get produced? Did they shoot it?
This got produced.
Oh.
This was
what I would give to see that.
This was the first script that they chose and produced. A little bit of Twilight Zone, a little bit of Man Magazine in that first script.
I love that. So that was your first one that got produced. Did they produce additional scripts that you wrote?
There was another script the following year. It was called The Fourth Wall, and it was about an actor who knew that he was on television, and he was seeing a psychiatrist because he thought he was on television.
There you go.
So
you have a lawsuit against the Truman Show.
Actually, the Gary Shandling show.
Gary Shandling.
which is weird because it wasn't. I had not seen the Gary Shandling show at that point in time. Mm-hmm. But that was just another warped reality type of thing. And then I had that success in college, and it was like, wow, I can write stuff and people like it. Mm-hmm. And so I started focusing on writing television scripts, movie scripts and television scripts, trying to get into that. But I didn't have the courage to actually go out to California and try to do that in any kind of serious way. So I was trying to write and contact agents from Rochester, New York.
Yeah.
Which the agents weren't really interested in somebody from the other side of the country in the pre-internet days.
Well, even now. If you're not living in L.A.
So I was writing spec scripts, and I was doing that and not getting with the agents. But Star Trek: The Next Generation was the one production in Hollywood that was taking unagented scripts.
Yep.
So I said, I've never written anything as long as an hour. My longest, I take that back. I did write a feature-length script, which will never see the light of day. Mm-hmm. But, so I decided to give Star Trek a try. I wrote a spec script for Deep Space Nine. That was a Julian Bashir and Kira Nerys story, which was, and this was like second season, so they had been at loggerheads, and so this was a story where he becomes interested in the Bajoran religion, and so they connect over that. So I submitted that, and that got me an invitation to pitch to the producers any other story ideas that I had.
So then you actually went out. You got a meeting.
I actually got a meeting. I actually got a meeting, and I flew out there. It was December of '93, and it was the evening of the Paramount Christmas party.
Oh,
so I tried to
man.
drive on. So I'm, in Los Angeles for the first time in my life, 20-some years old.
Oh, man.
Driving through LA through this, with no GPS, no anything like that. Get to the Paramount studio just about at appointment time, and of course it's a Christmas party. There's no parking. So I think I actually ended up taking a very distant and maybe not entirely legal spot, making my way to the Roddenberry building. Luckily, they were still waiting for me, and I got to sit down with Rene Echevarria, and he said, "Okay, let's hear your pitches.
What do you got, kid?
What do you got, kid?" And so I pitched the story about Cisco and Jake, and they encounter some kind of weird anomaly that only allows them to, either one of them to exist in reality at one time, either one or the other.
Oh, interesting.
So if Jake is around, Cisco is off in some kind of alternate suspended animation, and so he can trigger whatever it is and bring Cisco back, but Jake is going to be lost in this thing, and so
interesting.
So I pitched, which I thought was a fabulous story. This was my lead-off story. This is the story that's going to get the sale. I get about 1 minute into the pitch, and Rene goes, "I'm going to stop you there. We already have something very similar to that, which was The Visitor."
Oh, I can't remember that one.
That is Old Jake.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Not super similar, but I guess I
Not
can
not
understand.
super similar, but it's
Yeah.
But Cisco is gone from the universe, and Jake has to spend the rest of his life trying to bring Cisco back into the universe. I'm going to stop you there. What else have you got? And I had two other stories that I felt much less confident about.
Yeah.
And so I go, I just kind of break down at that point, saying I've already blown it. So, yes, and I think I finally muddled my way through the other two pitches, and I kind of got that's okay, but it's no. But Rene was nice enough to say, "This is really tough to do your first time, and you didn't do that bad." And gave me a little pat on the back as he showed me out the door, and and they did allow me to continue to pitch for DS9 and Voyager.
And did you ever get out there for another meeting, or were you just sending them stuff?
I was just they were doing phone pitches at that time for people who weren't in LA, so I did that about 3 or 4 times that I got to pitch some stories.
And even though none of those stories went anywhere, I mean, that is still great experience.
Oh yes, definitely.
You've done it. You've pitched.
The idea of coming up with a story and then paring it down to a pitch.
Yeah, that just terrifies me. But luckily for you and for your readers, that wasn't the end of your Star Trek career.
Well, luckily for me, yeah.
Because that's where you broke into professional publishing, correct?
Right, yes. After I'd been pitching for a while and I had all these stories that I had nothing else to do with, I discovered the Star Trek Online community.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was the 1990s and AOL was king, and I found people who wanted to put fanzines together and were looking for stories, and so I said, why not try to do that? So, and so I did that. I wrote some fan fiction. I actually wrote a Star Trek X-Files crossover story that Dayton Ward had read, and that kind of is what got us, connected as friends. So I got some experience doing those fan fiction stories, and then it was I think it was 97 that they announced the Strange New Worlds contest, and so I entered that for the first year and did not get into that. And I had a small fit online on AOL about, and then John Ordover, who was also online, was kind enough not to smack me across the face, across the internet.
Yeah.
But instead to say, okay, you got that out of your system. That's good. Now go write another one and show how well you really can do. And I kind of took that to heart, and I went to work for the next contest and managed to make it in for that year.
You went the full awardee, right? You got...
I am a proud recipient of the awardee.
Now
I think the third person to get placed 3 times in the Strange New Worlds contest.
Yeah, the contest rules specified that you could have up to 3 professional publications. And so if Strange New Worlds was your first professional publication, you could get up to 3 SNW stories before you were given the boot to make room for other up-and-comers.
Right.
And
it was a amateur, a non-professional writer contest, and at that point in time, the Science Fiction Writers Association rules were 3 short stories made you eligible for membership as a professional writer.
So Dayton Ward was the first one to get 3 stories in, and so then it became this running thing that it was awardee if you got 3 stories.
My Strange New World stories, one was a next gen DS9 type of crossover.
Okay.
One of them was a Dulmer and Luxley
That's
story.
right. That's right.
So that was kind of it was classified as a DS9 story, since that's where those characters had come from.
Right.
Even though it was more of a TNG story. Yeah. And then I had a Voyager story that was Black Hats, and that was in Volume 3. And then Volume 5 was The Trouble with Borg Tribbles.
Oh, yeah. So you got through the Strange New Worlds, and then that got you called up to the show.
That got me called up to the show. Dayton, of course, had blazed the trail for all of us who, he got in 3 times, and then it was, 1, 2, 3, volumes 1, 2, 3, and then John Ordover says to him, well, now how about you write a novel for us?
Yep.
And it's like, so then I took it the 3rd time, and I waited for John Ordover to call. And he didn't call, and and then I wrote an email to John Ordover saying, "Can I write a novel too?" And he goes, "You know what? Why don't you talk to Keith DeCandido? Because Keith DeCandido at that point was getting the Starfleet Corps of Engineers ebooks off the ground." And so I go, okay, and I talked to Keith, and Keith said, "Great, here's this story Bible, and here's the first few stories." And it took a few tries, a few different pitches, but then I managed to sell him a story out of the Cocoon, which was my first novella in Star Trek, and it was my first non-contest sale.
And then was that the longest piece of prose fiction that you'd written at that point?
That was the longest piece of prose fiction I had written at that point. I think something in the line of 12,000 words. Mm-hmm. My problem has always been being confident enough in my writing to write longer. where I started out with short stories, very short stories, because I didn't want to, stretch things out, make it too obvious that I didn't know what I was doing. It's taken a few years for me to work my way up to coming up with a piece of writing where I had enough to actually say.
Well, I wonder, though, if maybe coming from the scripting background, if that helped you be focused.
Probably so.
Telling,
in scripts, they tell you, do not direct on paper.
Yeah.
And so, you leave a lot of any kind of actor's direction and any kind of camera direction to a real minimum.
Yep.
So, and of course you don't have any kind of internal dialogue or sensory scene setting.
Yeah. So you got out of the Cocoon, and then you went on to do a couple more SCE, didn't you?
I had other pitches for SCE, but the line was canceled before any of those got in.
Oh, okay.
But I did have a novella in the Next Generation 20th anniversary 6-part series, Slings and Arrows.
That's what I'm thinking of, because that also was an ebook.
That was an ebook exclusive also.
Yeah. Okay, so that one you were working with other writers. Which number was it? There was 6?
So yeah, that was 6 authors, or actually 7. There was a team. Keith DeCandido, Stephen and Christina York, Phaedra Weldon, Terry Osborne, and Bob Greenberger.
Dear.
I was the 3rd book in the series, title The Insolence of Office. All the titles had come out of Hamlet's soliloquy. That also included the phrase "slings and arrows."
There you go. Was there a lot of back and forth then amongst the writers as you were working on it?
Yeah, there was a lot of back and forth. It was the concept was the first year on the Enterprise E, following the destruction of the D in Generations, because at the beginning of First Contact they had mentioned, the Enterprise E had been out there for a year at that point.
Yeah.
So this was exploring the first year of the Enterprise E's voyage, and it was also, to fill in a lot of the blanks that had been between Generations and First Contact. I took, my story was about Deanna Troi and Laxwana, who on Deep Space Nine, Laxwana had given up her ambassadorship and had become pregnant with the child of an alien, a non-Federation aligned alien, and she had to come back to Deep Space Nine, and Odo became the baby's father, quote unquote. And of course the episode had never mentioned Deanna, so what did Deanna think of all of this? And so that is what my story was about. And also the B plot was about Geordi losing his visor and getting his implants.
That was then the springboard to when you got a full-length novel.
Right. My first full-length novel, which was actually a short novel in the Myriad Universes anthology.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Infinity's Prism, and my story was A Less Perfect Union, and I believe it was one of the first crossovers between Enterprise and the original series, where it had an aged T'Pol interacting with Kirk and other characters. And it was a Star Trek alternate timeline type deal where Earth had not joined the coalition of planets that was being formed in the penultimate Enterprise episode.
Yeah.
And so so it was kind of a spin-off from that and linking it into the original series timeline.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that novel, your characterization of the elder T'Pol. It really drove the story. And then it was on the strength of that showing that then you got a standalone.
Losing the Peace, which was one of the 4 follow-up novels to Dave Mack's Destiny trilogy. Along with Keith DeCandido, he did the first Typhon Pact novel. Kirsten Beyer did, it was her first Voyager novel of her reworking of the Voyager series. And Christopher Bennett wrote a Titan book, and all of that was encompassed under an umbrella that was referred to as Cleaning Up Mac's Mess.
Because
Mac had...
Yeah, you never want to write the book after Mac.
He had destroyed about a third of the Federation and the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Empire, and that's why we love Dave Mack. And then after that, I got to do a original series standalone, which was The Shocks of Adversity.
You start off, you do a little fan fiction. It's like, oh, well, here's this Strange New Worlds thing, and it's like these dominoes that fall.
Right, yeah.
And next thing you know, you've written Star Trek novels, which was why you got started as a geek in the first place.
Pretty much so,
you were a
yes.
little child. So, yeah, both you and I are in a position where we have turned like one of our earliest childhood loves into a professional relationship with the franchise, and it's
pretty crazy when you think about it. It's like
it is indeed. Okay, so across many short stories, novellas, novels, having been able to write across a substantial amount of the franchise, both in the various series and the various TV series and the original Corps of Engineers series, original in fiction, did you have I don't mean to make you choose between your babies, but in broader terms...
But please choose between your babies.
But in broader terms, I mean, what is your favorite series? What is your favorite part of the franchise to write for? Or do you have one?
You know, I really can't pick a favorite of my babies because I enjoy writing across the franchise so much. Mm-hmm. Writing for Deep Space Nine intimidates me a little bit because it was just so well written, and it forced me to up my game. Writing for the TOS novel was a bit of a challenge because, you know, there's already been 50 years worth of stories in there, and you know, what can I do that doesn't repeat but is still true to the original series? So I mean, the most fun I've had was definitely with the alternate timeline, and being able to, you know, take the pieces and really mix them up and, you know, twist them around into, you know, looking at them from different angles and matching up one piece from this series and one piece from the other series. Even
though there's certain touchstones, certain motifs that have to stay the same to keep it a Star Trek story. Obviously, in doing the alternate timeline thing, you get to really experiment in ways that you never would.
Absolutely.
If Simon & Schuster called you up tomorrow and said, Bill, you can write any Star Trek thing you want, where would you go first?
I would probably have trouble answering the question right off the bat, like you just sprung it on me. You know, but you know, given the choice, I would like to try to do something that is universe spanning. You know, something that brings in as much of the Star Trek universe as I can. Well, I mean, I can tell you that, you know, some of the projects that I've had, you know, marinating in my brain for a while, I wanted to do a Zephram Cochrane novel for a while, which would bridge the gap between the eccentric drunkard that we saw at the end of Generations with the revered figure that was introduced in the original series, and to just, you know, look at that character's development as well as Earth's development and the early relationships with the Vulcans. Of course, I think Chris Bennett has already covered a lot of that area with his Enterprise novels. And then another novel idea that I had basically would have been the early history of the Ferengi Federation relationship, which would basically be season 1, but from the Ferengi's point of view.
Yeah. And maybe with a little retconning there to
and
smooth
with a
over.
little bit of retconning to make the Ferengi, not complete caricatures, and was kind of what I wanted to do with that.
But you've got other original fiction and stuff. You want to chat a little bit about some of your other...
Oh, we could chat
titles.
about that, certainly. Well, why don't I start with the original ebook that I put out a couple of years ago, since we were talking about early influences, and that is my novella, A Dimension of Death, which takes place in the early 1960s on the lot of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, where Rod Serling was producing The Twilight Zone. And there's a mysterious death on the set of The Twilight Zone. And in the course of looking into this, studio security brings in another person who happens to be on the lot, producing his series, The Lieutenant, one Eugene Roddenberry. And so you have Gene Roddenberry and Rod Serling off to solve murder.
I love this idea on several levels. Of course, there's just the obvious two iconic
Science
fiction figures
Yes.
in television. Of course, this is pre-Star Trek, but you bring those two things together, and you had mentioned earlier, so I mean, Star Trek and The Twilight Zone were both important shows in your development as a viewer and a writer, and just in the genre. And so, bringing those two things together, both on sort of the macro level, that it's like these icons of TV, but then also that it's on this personal level, is a lot of fun. And I'm also a sucker for period pieces, and so you get to have a lot of fun. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of fun with writing a period piece.
Yes.
And having to pay attention to the fact that phones are attached to walls.
Phones are attached to walls, and they're phone booths, and
yeah, and you must have done a lot of research on both of them at that time period.
Yep, I went through the couple of biographies there are on Roddenberry, and the 2 or 3 on Serling. I did a lot of reference on. There's a very nice coffee table book about the history of MGM Studios. I actually went and rented a few episodes of Have Gun Will Travel. That was Gene's biggest claim to fame at that point in time. And I actually found some episodes of Lieutenant online, which was very interesting because he had a lot of the actors from they would use in Star Trek. Majel Barrett was on that show, and Leonard Nimoy was on that show, and Gary Lockwood. He was the lead character, the titular lieutenant. And of course, and that was a show that most people don't even know about. It ran for 1 season and it disappeared. But if it had gone on longer, we would never have had Star Trek.
Yeah.
And the one. I'm not going to give away the twist at the end.
So you self-published that. So that was your introduction into that new thing that the kids do.
Yep, that was my experiment to see. I tried to sell it in a couple places, and it was a difficult sale because it's not actually science fiction, and it was a longer piece, so the magazines weren't really interested in it. So it was it was interesting to get into the marketing, and I created my own cover, with my very rudimentary Photoshop knockoff free software, and put that cover onto a postcard with the little description on the back. And so that it's a lot nicer than going to conventions saying, I have an ebook, you can go online and just search for it,
Yeah.
as opposed to something actually physical to say, here you are. Okay, and there was also another cool project, which you were part of as well.
Yes.
The Crazy 8 Press ReDeus series, the concept of which was that at the Olympic Games in 2012, all of the gods from all of history and prehistory suddenly reappear on Earth and announce, we're back, worship us. And the craziness that ensues from that event.
That was a fun bit of business. There was, because there was a lot of leeway in what to do, like which gods you would have in your story and where your setting would be in the world.
It was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
With a great bunch of people there at the Crazy Eight. Aaron Rosenberg, Bob Greenberger.
Yeah, a lot of names that'll be familiar to Star Trek fans because over the years, so much of the connections that we've made have been amongst people that were published at the Simon & Schuster Star Trek.
I mean, and it comes directly from my Star Trek experience. I would never have met people.
Exactly.
Had it not been for the Star Trek publications and being invited to shore leave. So, but that was fun. I got to really experiment a lot with different types of characters. The second story I did is written from the viewpoint of a young Asian American girl.
And as it turns out, you yourself are not a young Asian American girl.
As it turns out, I have not gotten the DNA test back yet. But to my knowledge, I am not a young Asian girl. But it was really good to challenge myself to get out of the white male viewpoint, and I hopefully did a good job of it.
Well, and this, I mean, and that touches upon a great topic of much discussion in writerly circles and elsewhere. But the idea of representation, where if you're a person who belongs to a group that tends to get a lot of the breaks, like being a white guy, that it's kind of nice. It's kind of important to try to bring in some a wider perspective into your fiction.
It was a conscious effort to try to stretch myself instead of just writing a European god.
Yeah.
To get into a different type of story. There are more stories out there.
And you did different stories every time, right?
My first and my third story are connected. They do have the same characters, but
I forgot that. The genre is probably best labeled as urban fantasy.
Yeah.
And I had never done urban fantasy before when I was invited. And so that was another part of it that was a challenge, that you were working in a different genre with different rules.
One of the funny things about that is that my first story, after all the gods show up, in my story, established that Pope Benedict steps down from the papal throne to allow a younger and more able man to lead the church. And strangely enough, within a year of that publication, Pope Benedict stepped down. So that was a fun little twist in history that I got a little pleasure out of being the fortune teller in that situation.
And you've recently gotten a interesting story in a small press anthology.
Yes, Zombies Need Brains is the name of the publisher. Yes.
That is a great small press name.
It's a great small press name. And they last year published an anthology, Second Round, Return to the Urbar, which is the second volume of short stories that take place in what is essentially the first bar that has ever existed. It is run by Gilgamesh, and he has been cursed from time immemorial to be part of this bar, which manifests itself in different ways, in different places, in different time periods.
So just about anyone can walk into this bar.
So just about anyone can walk into this bar at any point in history. Going back to ancient Babylonia, Mesopotamia, to the future Mars colonies. My story takes place in the 1920s during Prohibition in New York, and it involves a psychic medium who is actually a real medium. He has actual connection to the other realm, but he uses that in a very dishonest way. And he happens to wander into this bar in a very dishonest way, and he's having trouble because people are starting not to believe anymore. Harry Houdini was very famous, right before his death, for debunking a lot of these psychics and their activities.
Yeah, he would catch with his knowledge of magic, he would catch them at their tricks.
Right. So the psychic finds the Urbar, and Gilgamesh gives him a way to actually draw Harry Houdini from the afterworld to prove to the world that what he does is real. And then there's a little twist at the end.
Which we won't spoil.
Which we will not spoil.
I feel like I'm missing something. Did we leave something out of your career?
I'm sure we are. I mean, there are other web publications. A lot of them were for websites that have since gone dead, and semi-pro magazines that unfortunately do not last as long as we might like. But I've had the opportunity to experiment with a lot of other styles outside of Star Trek.
Yeah. Well, and even when you are writing something that's genre, like the Urbar story you were just telling, it's still a 1920s thing too. So even though it's a genre story, it's also a period piece.
Yeah. I also, like you, I've always been very drawn to period pieces. I was a huge fan of Mad Men. Other things, time travel and alternate timelines have always been big fans of.
We've covered this sort of the arc of your writing career up till now. One thing that interests me about this is, you started out more visually. You were doing the comic strips, and when you were in college, you were kind of looking more at TV production. So if you were to pop in on your younger self and say, well, actually, you're going to end up publishing a lot of prose fiction, would it just blow your mind? Would you just say, why would I be doing that? Or do you...
It would blow my mind in the fact that I would actually be able to write an entire novel.
Because one thing that I've noticed with a lot of the friends I've made over the years through the Star Trek connection and stuff, see, I knew that I wanted to be a writer by like the 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And then when I started getting to know more writers, almost none of them wanted to be writers. They were drawn into it because they loved Star Trek, and so they would start noodling around on fan fiction, and one thing would lead to another, and then suddenly they're successful writers. And so I'm always interested in how people find themselves in the writing game when they didn't set out from a younger age saying, well, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. A lot of them were saying, when I grow up, I want to be, whatever. They were other things, but they find their way in. So would you, in your formative years, let's say, would you have just been, I want to be a screenwriter, or a producer, or did you have any feeling for what you wanted to be?
I don't really think that if we go pre-college, I don't really think I had any real idea of what I wanted to do. I was good in school. I was, English was actually one of my poor subjects. And mostly because I did not like the assigned reading. I would rather read Douglas Adams than Oliver Twist. And so, if you had asked me in, junior high, I probably would have said, I'm going to be an accountant or something along those lines. And then I went to college for video production, and to be really honest, I'm not entirely sure how I landed on that. This is 30 years ago now,
yeah, yeah.
and I knew I loved television.
Mm-hmm.
Very much like your usual co-host decided that she enjoys the mass media and wanted to get into that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so now you're in a position where you are a professionally published writer.
Mm-hmm.
And so what have you got coming up next?
Well, I am still working on my original novel, which I really hope to get done before year's end.
Before this year's end?
Before this year's end, yes.
Okay, well.
It's a
clock is ticking.
Well, NaNoWriMo is coming up, and so
there you go.
And I have I've been doing a couple of nonfiction pieces for ATB Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
They do pop culture books. I had a review in their Star Trek Next Generation retrospective last year, and within the next month or less, they're putting out a Buffy volume where I have another episode review in that. Yeah, the episode is Living Conditions from it's the second episode of, I believe, season 4, her freshman year at college, Buffy's freshman year at college. The episode with Kathy Newman, who is the annoying roommate that she gets assigned to at college.
Oh, yeah.
Who turns out to be a interdimensional demon.
Like you do.
Like you do.
And then
when you live in Sunnydale.
And then we're not going to really say any details at this juncture, but then you and I are noodling around on a project together.
That's a secret.
Shh. Don't tell anyone.
But we both in this podcast have expressed our love of period pieces, so I think we can at least say that much.
There you go. There's a little
taste, a little incentive to come back.
It's genre and it's a period piece. That's all we're saying. So I'm kind of interested in the comparing and contrasting the original fiction to working in the franchise, and if you had any comments or stories or anything about the different challenges.
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge is that when you are working in the franchise and you are working on contract for an editor on deadline, you have to hit that deadline. When you're writing your own stuff, and basically the only deadline I have are self-imposed ones, it's very easy to say, well, I'm not going to make that deadline. I'd like an extension, please. And just that extension sometimes goes out for much longer than we want to admit that it has gone. As it's like the old Douglas Adams quote, I love deadlines. I love the sound that they make as they whoosh by. Yeah.
Every writer in our audience right now is shaking their head in total agreement. When you have that contract, when you have that deadline, it seems like it's so easy to just crank through and get a novel done.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're trying to write your own novel, it's like, well, suddenly 5 years have gone by or more, and you're like, why haven't I finished this? And I wrote that Star Trek novel in 2 months.
Yeah. And I can't. It's much harder to say to your editor at Simon & Schuster, yeah, well, I had a really rough week at work, and I had a call from my mother, and da-da-da-da-da.
Yeah. I'm just not feeling it this week.
I'm not feeling it this week. They're not going to accept it as well as I will when I go, you know what? I'd rather just watch Rick and Morty instead of writing right now.
In comparing and contrasting those things, we hit upon a couple of the key things that can make the writer's life just a living nightmare. And yet, man, we just so love it, don't we?
We keep doing it. We keep coming back to it. I mean, it would make sense for me to just say, you know what? Maybe writing isn't it. Maybe I'll just concentrate on the 9-to-5 job. That's what pays my bills. That's what pays the mortgage. And
yeah.
But no, we love it. we love it.
We love
For
it.
all its pain and all its... You have those rejections, and they sting, and they, you get a bunch of them, and they pile... The stinging, the pain continues to build. I heard a quote on a podcast recently about perseverance and working through failures, and I think it was Thomas Edison who said, I have not failed. I've just found 500 ways that this does not work, which is it's a important. I think that's probably an important perspective to keep, is that we're not going to get things perfect the way we want them the first time through. We just have to keep at it.
Words of wisdom for all the beginning writers out there,
and intermediate writers,
and professional writers,
and old pro writers.
Is there anything else that you want to drop on the listeners before we wrap up?
I want to just thank you for letting me sit in Ella's seat this month for the podcast. And
well, thank you.
We've been talking about getting me on this machine for a while now, and now that Ella's out of the country, I've gotten the opportunity. Love you, Ella.
And and then let's see. Well, the last thing I do now, you don't have a website, but
I do not have a website.
You are on the social media, so if you just want to tell the peoples where they can find you.
I tweet on the Twitter, and you can. My handle is at @BLeisner, even though I have my name up there as William Leisner. And I keep people updated with my projects and silly jokes that pop into my head and things that annoy me about the world at large.
And there's a lot of that these days.
Oh, let's not go into that.
We're not going there.
We've already been recording for a couple of hours now.
All right. Well, thanks again. And we're back with Ella, Skyping in.
Woo!
Since our last show, you haven't gotten up to a whole bunch of geeky stuff, but you probably have some geeky things to talk about.
We had finals. So yeah, I was writing my my final essays. I wrote that big essay on Hitchcock.
That's geeky. We're film geeks.
Classic.
So you've been experiencing a lot of Hitchcock films for the first time.
Yeah, well, yeah, because last semester I took that Hitchcock class, and I had literally never seen a Hitchcock movie before, ever. So yeah, so that was fun. I have a really great professor, so that's nice. He's actually from the U.S. as well.
So what have been your favorite Hitchcock films that you've seen now?
For sheer entertainment, I would say Psycho. Psycho blew me away, which is hilarious because every other movie, like Vertigo, hate Vertigo. Hate Vertigo so much. But Psycho really went above and beyond the hype for me. That might have been the first movie we watched, and I was like, oh, this class is going to be so good.
And what about Rear Window?
I think Psycho is number one, and then I think Shadow of a Doubt and Rear Window tie for the number 2 spot for me.
Yeah, Rear Window is one of my faves.
Yes.
And Psycho, of course.
Yeah. It's those 3.
Yeah.
I would say that if you or your young daughter haven't seen any Hitchcock, I would say watch those 3. And then if anybody tries to talk to you about any of the other ones, just say, no, thank you, sir. I'm here to talk about those 3, and that's all.
Of the ones you've seen.
Some of them, like Suspicion, which I think, I don't know, I think a lot of people don't like Suspicion. I think there's a weird amount of people that do like Suspicion. It's a bad movie. It is we can get into it later. It's an interesting movie, but it's a bad movie. Maybe worth a watch, but only if you're into the whole female paranoia. Hitchcock is a very interesting person. Suspicion, horrible movie. It's and that part of it, I think, was due to the studio. Because even the name, he was like, we should call it Johnny. It's way more creepy and weird. And they were like, no, we're gonna stick with doing the one word S names for movies. We're gonna do Suspicion, Sabotage. But then other movies, it's like he had much more creative control on, and it's still a disaster. But then you watch like Psycho, which is a cinematic masterpiece, and why? Mr. Hitchcock?
When he got started, the medium was so young, so everyone was just making things up as they went along and inventing things. And surely he, as a director who became very well known for certain directorial flourishes, of course, that was something that he developed.
The Hitchcock touch.
Over the years, as
in the biz.
Got more and more...
And his cameos, he had to move farther and farther towards the beginning of the movie because he knew everyone would just be distracted looking for him. He was like, I just gotta be on screen for half a second in the first 5 minutes. I wrote my paper on basically whether or not he was a misogynist, and the answer, I believe, is a hard no. And I think pretty much everyone that listens to this podcast is going to be like, but what are you talking about? In every one of his movies, a pretty blonde lady is tortured and killed. And it's like, okay, but...
These sorts of questions always have much more complex answers. People tend to go for the simple answer. But I think that Hitchcock was a complicated guy.
It's like, did he have some issues? Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Did he cast pretty blonde models on purpose in his movies? Yes. Long story short, was he a misogynist? No. He was a little bit, and maybe more like a large jerk.
Yeah. Okay, so you recently got to do something that I tried to do unsuccessfully when I was in England.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So me and my friend Paige, we took a day trip to Nottingham and Sherwood Forest.
Well, and I want to interject here. When you were pretty young, we started watching the classic British Robin Hood TV series in glorious black and white.
Ooh, what's that guy's name? The actor's name is something so ironic. It's like Richard Green or something who plays Robin Hood, and it's like, ooh, like, ooh.
So, yeah, you've been a Robin Hood person since you were a kid.
Forever.
Yeah. And when I was doing my study abroad 35 years ago, my buddy Tom and I decided to go to Sherwood Forest. And so we went out, we were out on the street to catch the bus. And after all these years, I can't remember all the details, if the bus was taking us right there or if we were taking the bus to a train station or what was going on. But we were waiting for the bus. And in England, you flag the buses down. There's never this like confusion about between the driver and the people that are waiting for at the bus stop.
Which I know it's like the thing here. It's just like what you do. But every time I feel like such a jerk.
Waving at the bus?
I feel like an idiot, every single time.
I loved it. It makes so much more sense than the way we do it here. But so anyway, we were standing out on the street at the bus stop, and here was coming the bus. We could see the number. We could see it was our bus, and we were waving frantically at it, and the bus never even slowed down. It just whizzed right past us. So I don't know what happened there, if it was completely full or I don't know what, but... So that day was scrubbed. It's like, okay, we'll have to try again. And so I think the thing was that it was probably kind of late in the school year, so that we didn't have that many chances to try again left before we came back to the States. And so we just, it never came together. So I never got to Sherwood. But you did.
I did, and I think we're planning on, taking you there when you visit.
Yes.
So you're going to make it. But yeah, me and Paige went to Sherwood, and Paige is not like a nerd. She just kind of like wanted to go to Sherwood and Nottingham, just because England. We got up early, we took the train out to Nottingham, and then you have to do sort of like, you do like this shuffle where you buy like a day pass for their stuff and get on another bus, and that bus takes you like almost to Sherwood, and then you sort of like, it's very just like funny and a little strange, but it's just like literally it's like at the edge of like a neighborhood, like a suburb of Nottingham. you just like walk around like a corner and it's like a driveway, and they have a couple of buildings that are more like community centers now, I think, because they do like art classes there and stuff. But they just built a brand new visitor center like really, really recently, so it's still like very shiny and like modern and new. But yeah, so there's this big visitor center, and then there's like a big field. I get the impression that a lot of what they do there is like elementary school field trips.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have this awesome playground that I really almost was like, Paige, I think we gotta go spend like 10 minutes over there because I want to climb on that. But yeah, no, and so you just get there, and obviously it's like free because it's just like the woods, and you just like walk in. But it's so strange. It's like you're walking on your way in, you're just walking past, like on your like left hand is just like someone's like field, like it's just farms.
Yeah.
But then in front of you and on your right is just like literally Sherwood Forest. And they have the major oak there, which is an oak tree that's like over 1,000 years old, and so that's crazy and huge, and like parts of it are being like held up by
yeah, it's all propped up because they're trying to keep it going.
They're like, please just don't fall apart. It's weird because it's like, in looking at it in reality, it's just like that's any just like wooded part of England.
Yep.
But I don't know, it's like surreal being there, and it was like a little foggy, and like all of the forest floor was just like carpeted in like orange leaves. And it was just like very, very pretty and like very quiet. I remember, I think we were there on like a weekday. Well, I think it was a Friday, but it was like it was early on a Friday. Like we got there like midday on a Friday. And so it was just like very, very quiet, and there were not that many people around. So we just like walked around for a little bit. We did see a little group of maybe like second or third graders who were there on a field trip with a dude walking them around the forest that was dressed like Friar Tuck, which was like
nice,
the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. And they were all so excited. We went and we got some cheese toasties at the they have like a little cafeteria in the visitor center. But yeah, and then beyond like Sherwood, so you have, I mean, it's like the whole place is just like gorgeous. And then I don't realize here that it's weird for me to be living in such a big city until I leave and there's like trees, and I'm like, oh my, it's like something in me just like I exhale like cement air or something. And it's so like odd, because I feel like in Minnesota, like Minneapolis is like a big city, but you drive for like 15 minutes and you're like on a farm in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And here it's like everywhere I go, I take the tube. And so whenever I go someplace, because even like Hyde Park or whatever, it's gorgeous, but you're like in the city and there's people around.
Yeah.
But yeah, so to be like in Sherwood and just be like walking around, it was like you like exhale some weird like pollution and just like recharge. Then you get to go, like Nottingham is adorable, and they have Nottingham has this weird like history because the entire place is built on top. It's like sandstone, but because it's sandstone, people forever like were just like carving weird like caves out, and so there's like just networks and networks of these caves under the town, because people would like live just like underground, or you would like carve out your own like wine cellar in your house. And so so many of these caves are just like weird privately owned like holes, because you'll just buy a house, but then in the creepy basement of your house is like a weird trapdoor, and it's just like a sandstone cave under your house.
Yeah.
And then after, it's like people were living in them, and then like during World War II, they were like bomb shelters.
Yeah.
And so it's this whole weird thing, but it's like, so you can just go, there's like this mall, and you just like go in the mall, and in like the basement of the mall is like Nottingham Cave tours, and you go in there and you pay like £6, and you like go down this weird skinny spiral staircase, and then you're just in like this cave.
Cool.
And you just walk around for like ever, and there's still like natural like water and like weird stuff, and there's still like some of it is like, oh, here's like a reconstruction of what it would have looked like when people were like living in squalor on like underground. But then some of it is like, oh, like that's a wall and that's a well and just like weird, crazy, creepy stuff. But then you look up and it's like, that's like obviously the like we're under a mall. That's obviously like weird cement honeycomb mall building. So that's crazy. They have Nottingham Castle, which is unfortunately under construction for a couple of years, I think. But you can still walk all the way around it, and that whole thing is like built into this weird like bluff, and that's the same thing where there's just like weird. You can look in, because we walked all the way around the outside of it still, and you can still look in, and there's like weird like holes in the sandstone and like up just like all kinds of weird stuff, and that's crazy. And I'm a nerd for castles. And so that's gorgeous. And then we went there's a pub in Nottingham that is one of like 11 pubs in England that claim to be the oldest pub in England. It's called like Ye Old Jerusalem. And so we went there, and it's like, that is like half of it is like sandstone wall. It's like half of the, like it just was built into like this bluff. And so you go in parts of it, the ceiling is like sandstone and the walls are like sandstone. It was so strange and hilarious and amazing. And it was like a scene in a movie where like in like a Western where like the, you know, out of town cowboy like kicks open the door and it just like everything goes quiet and like somebody like stops playing the piano. It's weird because we got there and we were like, oh, like all of these people and their grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents have lived in Nottingham since the beginning of time. Yeah. And then we just walk in, there's like 8 people like older than you, just like singing. And I was like, I don't know why, like it's popping for like grandparents in Ye Old Jerusalem at 6 p.m. on a Friday, but it was popping. Well,
that's the classic British pub culture.
Oh, definitely. Like everyone's down the pub.
Everyone's down the pub and doing sing-alongs and
No, and I'm like joking, like everybody was like, nobody stopped talking. Everyone we had interactions with was very friendly, but like the bartender and the dude who watched us order from the bartender were both visibly confused by the 2 like 20-year-old American girls being like, can I have a pint of this cider? Okay. I saw you guys have Old Moot on tap. That's my favorite, so thank you.
So getting back to being a film geek, now this semester you've got another couple of film classes, right?
Yeah. This semester I'm taking a course called London on Film, which is, as the name suggests, about how London is represented in movies, both American and British. And that's very fun. And in that class, the first movie we watched was Notting Hill, which I actually had never seen before, even though like British rom-coms specifically is like a micro genre that I love. But I'd never seen Notting Hill, which is like obviously a classic. And then partially I think because of the movie and partially because we just hadn't been there, like literally that weekend, me and my friend Hannah like went to Notting Hill, and it was like a Saturday, and so we got there. And I don't know if you've seen Notting Hill?
Yes,
a long time ago.
Yeah, I saw it like way back, probably when it first came out on VHS.
So a bit in the movie is like the market, and like it has this really fantastic scene like showing the passing of time where like he's walking, the main character played by, you know, heartthrob McGee, he's walking through the market, but as he's walking, like the seasons are changing, and like at the beginning there's like a pregnant woman, and at the end she's like holding a baby, and it's like this really cool like long like shot. And so we get there and we're like, okay, like let's walk. There were some charity shops that we wanted to stop into. We wanted to get like something to drink, I think. So we were just like walking through. We were like sort of making our way to, because the door the door of the main character's house is like still there, and it's still painted the same color. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll go over there eventually, but we'll just walk. But like the market was like all set up, and it was like blocks and blocks of this market. And so it was weird because it's like we stepped off of like the tube, and like 2 seconds later we were like in the movie. Like literally, I was like, I saw that storefront in the movie. I saw that, like I'm walking through this thing. And yeah, we like walk around and we get to like the door, and there's like a couple of other girls there like taking pictures with it. And there is the dude in the movie like owns like a book shop.
Mm-hmm.
And the bookshop in the movie is based on a bookshop that used to actually be in Notting Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a bookshop in Notting Hill, and that bookshop is on the same location as the bookshop that the real bookshop.
Uh-huh.
And so, and they have a sign at the bookshop which is just as confusing as all the words that I'm saying. So there's a bookshop that's neither the original bookshop nor the bookshop in the movie, but there is a Notting Hill bookshop. And so everyone goes there, like take pictures with it. No, yeah. So we took pictures with the door to the dude's apartment, and immediately after I stepped off of, because this is like a real like people live there, and I step off of the stoop, and immediately the door opens and someone comes out, and I was like, oh my god, it scared me so bad, and I was already so embarrassed to be like taking pictures with this stupid door from a rom-com. But yeah, that was fun. And then we found there's a bit in the movie with like in some neighborhoods of London they have like these private gardens in the middle of like it's like a square block almost, and then in the middle of it is like a garden, and you have a key to the garden if you live in a house that like borders the garden.
Yeah.
And so that's like a whole thing in the movie. And so we went to like the garden that they filmed at.
Mm-hmm.
And that was funny because it's like when we got there, I thought that it was going to be just like, oh, they had filmed like literally this specific gate, but we got there and I was like, they walked down this whole street. Like I looked down the street, and it's so funny just because I don't, we live in Minnesota. We don't go to filming locations a lot. And so I like turned and I was like, we're in the mood. Like they shot right here. Like they walked around that corner.
Yeah.
My other film class this semester is called Screening History. And so it's kind of just about like how the past is represented in historical films.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we watched, so Kate Blanchett in like 1998 starred as Elizabeth I in a movie called Elizabeth,
mm-hmm.
which is a fun movie. They had a extremely high budget for 1998, but is also like one of the most flawed historical movies, at least I've ever seen in my entire life. This movie was not only hella sexist, but was also transphobic, homophobic, and basically by the end of it, just completely demonized femininity to the point of me just like having an existential crisis walking out of the movie theater. I think it's going to be fine, but there's always some boys in any college seminar who think a lot of themselves.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited because it doesn't seem like anyone's like a jerk, but I'm like also I'm going to ruin you if you say something stupid. Like I'm a great film student is the moral of the story is what we're saying here. So it's fun to be a film student because your classes are just watching movies and then destroying them piece by piece or lifting them up scene by scene. Thank you. This has been my TED Talk.
All right. So one super geeky thing that's happened since you last checked in was season 2 of Discovery has started.
And can I just say, thank God. I didn't realize until I literally clicked play. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know how much I needed this.
Now, of course, people can get your full commentary on the new season by checking out the Discoverage podcast.
Yes, listen to Discoverage. It's so much fun.
So we're not going to go in depth here, but I'm assuming you were quite happy with the first episode.
I'm quite happy. The second Ethan Peck is on screen as Spock, I'm going to have a mental breakdown.
I really liked the glimpses we got of young Spock in that first episode, and I liked some of the details that, like when we first see him in his childhood room, there's a 3-dimensional chess set in his room, which I loved. And then when we see his quarters on the Enterprise, you see his Vulcan lyre, you see a sort of ceremonial bell thing.
Oh my god,
that looks like bells we saw in Amok Time.
Yeah.
When they were on Vulcan. So there was really nice attention to detail both in his childhood room and on his quarters on the Enterprise. So someone posted online a picture of the little boy Spock.
Oh my god, that little boy is so cute.
Yeah, next to the little boy as he was represented in the animated series.
Yeah.
And it almost
exactly
looked... Oh my gosh. I was like... It almost looked like they cast that kid to look like the animated version.
His little round face.
Yeah.
Oh man, kills me. We hear Spock's voice for the first time. We don't see him, but we hear his recording of his voice, and even that, I was like, oh, it hurts.
Yeah, I thought it all came together quite nicely.
Yes, overall, I was so impressed by everything, the writing, the cinematography. Like, it's just a work of television art. I could write a paper about just that episode and what that episode means for Star Trek and television going forward, but I'm not going to.
It was very well, like the first season, even more so. It's very big. You know, they're spending lots of money.
I was literally in the middle of this episode. I was like, the money they paid. I'm like, I hope they saved some for the rest of the season, because tune into Discoverage. We go live every week, and you can picture me nursing an energy drink. And
you did Discoverage episodes for the short treks as well.
Yes, we did.
And I got to stand in for you
a couple times. I was so sad.
A couple times.
The thing about being a college student who also needs to take advantage of traveling while in Europe is that sometimes the cheapest option really interferes with your own personal life goals. So like and you can imagine, because I'm attached enough to this podcast that it wasn't even a question for me that I was going to stay up late enough to go live. And I mean, I even had a conversation with Aaron where he was like, what are we going to do next year when you're gone? I don't know what I'm going to do. And I was like, well, I'm going to be on the podcast, so you don't have to do anything because I'm going to be there. And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, yes. All in 100%. And so even I missed 2 short trek Discoverages, and that killed me. And now I'm so happy to be back every week talking about Star Trek, having guests on. We had Dave Gallanter on this week, and he's my favorite, and he's super fun.
We have to have him on this show.
We do. He needs to be on this show.
Okay, as we record this, in just a little over a week, I'll be joining you there in London, as we previously referenced about Sherwood. Is Sherwood the geekiest thing that you and I are going to do together when your mom and I are visiting you in London, or what else is going to happen there?
That's a good question.
Oh, well, we're probably going to do a Jack the Ripper walking tour.
We're definitely doing that Jack the Ripper walking tour.
So that's kind of geeky.
It's funny you said it, because I just saw a poster on the tube today for a Jack the Ripper opera called Women of Whitechapel. Oh. And I'm going to look into it, but I mean, that's very high up on my list of weird juxtaposition things to experience in my lifetime. Oh, we're definitely going to go get a sandwich at Speedy's Market, which is the shop that Mrs. Hudson owns in Sherlock.
Oh, there we go.
Where they film the outside. Yeah. The exterior of 221B is an actual like townhouse thing. Yeah. You know, weird English house in I think like North London, and they have like Speedy's Market is there. And a girl in my class one time told me she was because we were walking. This is a different thing. One time I was walking past where they filmed the exterior shots for the Reichenbach Fall, which was traumatizing. And I was there on like a field trip, so I was with like my classmates. And so one of my classmates told me that that's where it was. And I was like, oh my God. And then she told me, like, you have to go to Speedy's Market. They make the best sandwiches. So we're definitely going to be eating one of those.
I definitely need to go by 221B.
Oh, definitely. And that is not that far from Abbey Road Studios.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know what else. There's lots of weird. London is like very, because you'll just be walking and there'll be like a plaque that's like, in America, it would be like if you were just walking along a street and then there was a plaque that was like, Thomas Jefferson lived here. And it was just some random house where someone still lives for no, like, and you're just like, excuse, what? But yeah, it's going to be very fun.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Tune in next time for episode 53, Return to Ragnarok, our lost episode that we recorded in the middle of the night right after seeing the premiere of Thor Ragnarok, but somehow never got around to finishing before now. Remember that Generations Geek is a part of the Chronic Rift Network, which broadcasts from the trash heaps of planet Sakaar. Please give their other fine podcasts a listen at chronicrift.com. Thanks for listening, and come back next time. No geeks were harmed in the making of this podcast.
Ooh, shiny.